Look, he came to America. He wanted to be among his own, and his own received him not. Why wasn't Tyler Perry there when he went to Tyler Perry's studio?
Why did Obama only spend a few minutes
Right? Why did
at the dinner?
Come on, man. I'm telling you, that lit me, man. I understand Mr. Perry he has schedule, but he's a head of state, man.
And I'm sure this wasn't no spur of the moment.
He's a head of
These are
state.
schedules.
You mean to tell and you listen, you your own boss. You your own dude. You got millions, billions of dollars.
Look,
You couldn't alter the schedule for whomever else that you can receive.
they ain't show the Mr. Ruto, President Ruto, no
Shit,
none.
I felt I was angered by that.
One of the highlights of President Ruto's state visit to the US was supposed to be a visit to the Tyler Perry studios. You and I know that one of the things that Africa has suffered the most, and by extension its extended family in the US, is the framing by Western media. So it was crucial that President Ruto met with Tyler Perry, but the brother was a no-show. And instead, who did he send? Steve Harvey. Why would Tyler Perry miss meeting the head of state of a nation such as Kenya? That there is a curious question, and my brother Lamar here raises it. Visiting Tyler Perry essentially is a meeting that was expected to be crucial in advancing the filmmaking industry, in advancing relations between African Americans and Africans on the continent in terms of content creation, in terms of framing the Africa agenda, framing the African story in the West. Pundits are saying that it is likely linked to President Ruto's reputation as a leader of the nation of Kenya.
We have made the decision that it is not intelligent for 54 of us to go and sit before one gentleman from another place. And
President Ruto has traversed the continent on a crusade to speak as an African leader and espouse the idea that it is time that Africa stands on its 2 feet. It is time that Africa does not parade itself before the Western powers. There is a major backpedaling there. He has not done justice to himself in terms of representing what he speaks. One can then read that kind of a problem with certain individuals choosing not to identify with President Ruto for the reason that he's been unable to keep the word and the promise to the African nation to represent Africa and to represent the diaspora. President Ruto announced the idea of a free visa for black diaspora. But within a very short time, they soon discovered when they went online that it never really was free. So these kinds of inconsistencies are creating problems diplomatically and even locally within the nation of Kenya. The president's economic advisor, David Ndii, is on record saying that from his own observation since joining government,
government is extremely wasteful. There is not a single day that I'm not exasperated.
And that is what brings me to the major controversy in this trip, that the head of state decided to hire a jet for the Kenyan delegation going to the US. It has raised a lot of heat, it has raised a lot of storm. For what reason would a head of state who's been pushing for austerity measures backtrack on the same and still spend colossal amounts of money on diplomatic missions? Granted that diplomatic missions have a value to the nation in terms of bilateral agreements, bilateral relations, because we do not live on an island. We engage with other nation states. The question of the expenditure on that trip remains a bloat on President Ruto's delegation. It also paints a bad picture for the country's national carrier, Kenya Airways, or KQ as it's known, that perhaps may have provided a better alternative. Of course, it can be argued that the president needs to travel comfortably, be well rested, and be ready for meetings, be ready for engagements, essentially hit the ground running. Those details were not made to the public because what you do is provide information that can be relatable, that can be verifiable. What Kenyans are hearing now are just quick rebuttals because the criticism is coming out fast, it's coming out furious, and Kenyans are not happy. You cannot blame them. Kenyans are hard-pressed. The economic times are really harsh. So the ordinary folk who are feeling overburdened by the tax to keep facing this will not be happy about it. So on the surface, one would argue that the visit was successful. And indeed, it had all the color, the pomp, and the guest list. The former American president, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. It was an A-list at this event. Bilateral agreements were reached, but to a certain degree, these deals appear to benefit the US much more than Kenya.
Washington, as you have mentioned, has committed millions of dollars for the cost in Haiti. Isn't it ironic that while America is ending its forever wars in Afghanistan, the latest in 2021, under your leadership, when you withdrew troops from Kabul, and that you are committing Kenya to another foreign wars 12,000 kilometers away from Nairobi?
Strategically, the US is looking to counter the growing influence of China and Russia in Africa. And by establishing a military base within Kenya, for example, they are essentially creating a buffer zone that can help them secure the nation of America, but from far off in East Africa. And the presence in Djibouti speaks to that, and their presence, likely presence in Lamu, and the expansion and the engagement and relation with Kenyan security forces speaks to that. In truth, over the decades, the US have had a tendency to prioritize their own interests in Africa and even in Europe. The NATO alliance came right off the back of the Second World War, and that was meant to fend off the rise of the Eastern Bloc. But in Africa, the hand of America in terms of meddling and their influence in Africa has been very evident. Patrice Lumumba in Congo is a very good example of that kind of meddling. So the presence of the US in many, many areas across the world has always been a destabilizing factor for security in those regions. And the exit of the US from Iraq has a tale of its own. Afghanistan, we saw the chaotic mess when America left. And this happened during Joe Biden's time. So ultimately, the one thing that is clear and cannot be denied is that both these gentlemen, President Ruto and President Joe Biden, have been under siege at home.
Medical staff in Kenya are on strike for a fourth week running.
That's all right. That's all right. President Ruto going off on a frenzy across Africa to essentially ensure that his victory as head of state for this nation was legitimized through diplomatic missions, through Pan-African engagements. Biden, on the other hand, is under siege at home, threatened by the former President Trump, and there's every indication that Trump may come back as president, and that the Democratic Party, as we know it today, is slowly losing the African-American base in the US. That voting bloc seems to be slipping out of their hands. Some of these deals, some of these bilateral engagements are long-term projects. Should Donald Trump become president, will they ever stand? Will they? Your guess is as good as mine. So the big question is this. Considering that President Ruto has been backpedaling on some of the things that he's said in diplomatic missions, at international forums, at African forums, where is the trust? Where is the confidence that in representing Africa, in representing Kenya, where is the confidence that our own head of state will not fall prey to the schemes of the US in a realist ecosystem where every nation looks out for its interests? And being a superpower, the influence of the US in Africa, the muzzling of certain African states, the assassinations that have happened in Africa. Patrice Lumumba in Congo at independence was taken out. So the dirty warfare by America across the world is common knowledge, and indeed the state of America is now releasing documents, secrets that date back to the post-independence era, that are finally revealing the true nature of the US in ensuring that it is America first. Can President Ruto make Kenya first? Can President Ruto make Africa first? That is the big question. If this resonates with you, and if you're keen on the African affairs and diaspora affairs, if you are Afrocentric, you are at the right place. This is home. So like, subscribe, and let's get the story out. Africa has got to look out for its business. The nation of Kenya, as an anchor country in the region, has got to engage, yes, bilaterally, multilaterally. But as my good professor says, Professor Maluki, kosa sio kosa, kosa ni kurudia kosa. In other words, it's Swahili, but in English it means it is not wrong to make a mistake, but the biggest stupidity is to be played twice. Are we going to let ourselves be played twice? We lost our brothers and sisters 400, 500 years ago. Are we going to let that happen to the continent of Africa again in broad daylight? Let's have a discussion. Let's kick up a storm. This is Afrocentric. Many thanks for your time. And please do remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next video. I'm out.